She could feel his presence so close it made her skin prickle. Afraid to look up, she kept her eyes locked on the ground, her heart pounding so hard it drowned out every other sound. His silence was heavier than the night around them. Finally he spoke, his voice cold but steady, demanding to know why she refused to look at him. His words struck her like ice when he mentioned the way she watched him every night from her bedroom window, mocking her for finally having the chance to see him up close after all her spying. Amara froze in place. Panic washed through her as she realized he had known all along. Every single night she had stood behind her curtains thinking she was hidden, he had been aware. She was speechless, humiliated, and terrified all at once, her eyes still glued to the ground as if it could swallow her whole. Impatient, Liwei grabbed her face roughly, tilting her chin up until her eyes were forced to meet his. Up close, he was breathtakingly handsome. Sharp features, dark eyes that carried a chilling coldness, and an energy so intense it pinned her to the wall. She tried to break eye contact, but his grip on her face only tightened, making escape impossible. He leaned in closer, his gaze hard and unyielding, and told her he had tolerated her secret watching because he had assumed she was just another crazy fan, with no sense of boundaries or privacy. But he accused her of crossing a line when she involved his best friend, claiming that handing over the lost phone had only been another ploy to get closer to him. He said it was disrespectful and that he would never allow it again. Finally finding her voice, Amara, her words trembling, tried to explain herself. She insisted she wasn't a fan and had no idea who he was. The phone incident had been nothing but a coincidence. She had found it and returned it out of honesty, not obsession. But Liwei only scoffed at her explanation, clearly unmoved by her pleas. Snatching her phone from her hand, he demanded she unlock it. Intimidated by the ice in his stare, she obeyed without protest, her fingers shaking as she typed in the code. He flipped through her phone, eyes scanning every corner as if searching for hidden photos or evidence of her so-called obsession. Amara watched him in silence, her fear mixing with disbelief. Up close, he was even more terrifying than she had imagined. His cold aura stripped away every illusion she had created in her mind. Even though he was devastatingly handsome, there was nothing gentle about him. His presence was suffocating, leaving her rooted to the spot. After what felt like an eternity, he stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he warned her to stop. He told her this would be the last time he would tolerate her spying. She was to keep her curtains shut, to never look into his world again. If he ever caught her lurking in the shadows of her window, he promised he would come straight into her house and teach her a lesson himself. Amara, trembling, tried to stammer out a protest. She wanted to enjoy the city view, after all. But he cut her off coldly, telling her she could look anywhere except into his world. If he ever caught her again, there would be consequences far worse than tonight. Finally, he shoved her phone back into her hand. Amara clutched it tightly, her breath caught in her throat. Without daring to look back at him, she turned and fled down the street, her feet carrying her as far from his chilling presence as possible. She ran all the way home, vowing to herself that she would never again stand by that window, no matter how beautiful the city lights looked from it. Amara rushed into the house, her heart still pounding from the encounter. May, who was still seated in the living room watching TV, noticed how unsettled she looked and asked if she was all right. Without giving May the chance to press further, Amara quickly assured her that she was fine and hurried upstairs to her room. She went straight to her window and drew the curtains shut, just as she had promised herself she would. The memory of Liwei's cold, intimidating presence lingered in her mind, and she knew she never wanted to provoke him again. Sitting on her bed, she tried to steady her breathing and make sense of everything that had just happened. It was her first time meeting someone so cold and imposing, and she couldn't help but feel disappointed that all his good looks were wasted on such a harsh personality. Trying to shake off the thought, She opened her laptop to continue working on her scholarship applications, hoping it would distract her from the fear still knotting her chest. A sudden email notification popped up, and when she opened it, her heart leapt. A wide smile spread across her face as she read that she had been invited for a scholarship interview at Eastgate University, one of the most prestigious universities in China. She read the email again and again, hardly believing it was real. Overcome with excitement, she jumped off her bed and began bouncing around the room, thrilled that something so good had come out of a day that had nearly ended in fear. At least something bright had come from the chaos. She wasted no time rushing out to share the good news with James and May. The following week, James drove Amara to her interview. She sat in the passenger seat, her eyes glued to her notes, studying them over and over to make sure she wouldn't slip up during the interview. James occasionally glanced at her, gently reminding her not to put too much pressure on herself, but Amara barely looked up. She knew she had to pass the interview. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. She checked her phone for the time and noticed how many alarms she had missed. Alarms she had once set to remind her to watch Liwei from her window. She chuckled silently, proud that she had managed to keep her promise and hadn't spied on him for an entire week. She planned never to do it again, and secretly hoped their paths would never cross, because just the memory of looking at him up close still sent shivers down her spine. When they finally arrived at the university, James wished her good luck and reminded her to call him once she was done so he could come back for her. Amara smiled gratefully, got out of the car, and followed the signs to the student center, where the interviews were being held. She walked through the vibrant campus, taking in its energy and beauty, silently praying that she would make it in. She imagined herself walking these same paths as a student, making new friends, studying hard, and eventually graduating, making her mother proud from wherever she was watching over her. Inside the interview hall, she found a few other candidates already seated. She took a seat next to a foreign-looking guy and greeted him with a polite smile. He confirmed he was also there for the interview and mentioned that it would begin any minute. Amara nodded and returned her focus to her notes, flipping through them one last time as she whispered a silent prayer that everything would go well. A few minutes later, the door swung open and a Chinese woman stepped out, holding an iPad. She scanned her list and called Amara's name. Amara shot up from her seat, indicating her presence, and the woman smiled warmly, informing her that she would be the first to be interviewed. With trembling hands, Amara looked at the guy next to her, who gave her an encouraging smile before she stepped forward. Inside the interview room, her heart raced as she took her seat opposite two interviewers, a woman and a man, who looked at her with serious, professional expressions. She took a few steadying breaths to calm her nerves. The woman smiled at her, asking if she was comfortable. Amara forced a smile and nodded. The woman began to glance through Amara's CV and documents laid out on the table, but just as she was about to speak, her phone rang. She excused herself and stepped out of the room to answer the call. Left alone with her thoughts, Amara sat upright, trying to maintain her composure and mentally rehearsing her answers. A few minutes later, the woman returned, apologizing for the delay, and explaining that they would have to wait a few more minutes for the newly appointed director of the university, who wished to observe the interviews. She encouraged Amara to drink some water to calm her nerves while they waited. Amara took a bottle, sipping carefully, trying to keep her mind steady and her confidence intact. She reminded herself that her credentials were strong and her story was genuine. She believed she had a real chance at this scholarship, and she couldn't afford to falter now. Just then, the door opened again. The woman and her colleague immediately stood to greet the new arrival. Amara rose too, her heart beating a little faster as she turned her head to see who it was. But when her eyes met the face entering the room, every ounce of confidence drained from her. Standing before her, wearing the formal air of authority, was the one person she never wanted to see again, the same guy from across her bedroom window. The same guy who had grabbed her by the corner and made her promise to never look his way again.